Peggy Van de Plassche is a former finance executive turned into microdosing and psychedelic speaker. She has her own podcast, The Microdose Diet, as well as a newsletter by the same name. And she actually just released a book called The Microdose Diet that you can get on Amazon now. Stops by the podcast today to chat about psychedelics and about life. If you are not following the Trip Sitting podcast on social media, make sure to do so. It is underscore trip sitting underscore on Instagram and TikTok. And then also make sure to give this podcast a rating if you've been listening and you feel called to do so. So that way we get in front of more viewers. That's all I got for the intros. So let's get into it.
It's funny because I used to be in finance and I have the same thought sometimes. What would I be doing differently if I were to go back? And it's funny because we all think it doesn't align with us anymore, whatever career we had in the past. But I'm not sure if we were going back, if we would not actually bring a lot of value and get a lot of value because our perspectives have changed. I don't think I will ever try it, but it's just something I play with as well sometimes. Yeah.
So you just released the Microdose Diet,
Yes.
the book, correct?
Yes, it's very exciting. I released it actually last week, so it's still very, very fresh. And it's so interesting because that book represents 15 years of seeking, put in one protocol that kind of combine all the tools I loved. And it's really the book I wish I had 20 years ago. And it includes obviously the practice of microdosing psilocybin in that protocol. And I just think, oh, what would my life had look like if I had, microdosed earlier, if I had known all the things I know now. So it's a bit a guide that I wish people will enjoy and also use every day, every month, and will give them what I didn't have, a guide that's not just telling you the theory, but is actually very applicable to your life. Yeah.
Yeah. So is it meant as sort of a like follow along as you're following I believe the 90-day protocol that you have to be able to actually use the book and gain tools and gain the knowledge from it as you're starting that journey?
Exactly. And it's probably a protocol you will follow, I don't know, every year, twice a year, I don't know. But it's not once done and finished. Growth is perpetual, so you can bring it to any level you are, whether you're level 10, level 100 or level 25, you will benefit. But it's really, that step by step. So first, there is a first part on psychedelics,
Mm-hmm.
because many of us, I know when I started microdosing, I mean, we don't live in isolation. So the stigma that has been around for 40, 50 years, I still had to deal with it. So I did a lot of research, but even if the research you're doing is very conclusive, you still have that fear because, well, we've been brainwashed with fears when it comes to psychedelics. So the first part is really about giving knowledge about psychedelics in a very approachable way. Listen, I didn't go in a scientific 500 pages of everything because I don't think anyone reads that, and I don't think anyone is taking, any value from something like that, honestly. These are more books if you're doing a PhD or something like that. And within the book, my intention as well, it is in the book when I wrote it, I also had an intention, and it's really for people to take a step back and understand to which extent we're following, we've been we've been conditioned, and all the information I'm putting, I always bring it back. Do your own homework. You don't have to believe me. Does it make sense? but also look as if we were starting everything from a blank page today. Does it make sense we can buy as much alcohol as we want, but you cannot microdose psilocybin to heal you? You can buy tobacco, but you need to have a doctor to prescribe you, psilocybin. So it's really also for people, not just to follow. It's also for them to think and to
Yeah,
feel. Yeah,
I think being able to help people ask the right questions and find the answers themselves, I find so
exactly.
much more valuable than simply just telling people the answers like, hey, this is what you should do, this is what works for all these people. It's more just like, I'm not sure, this is what I found to work, these are the questions that I asked and these are the conclusions that I came to, but I challenge you to ask your own questions and figure it out for yourself. I think we've done a lot of work at this point where, we're pretty confident that a lot of people will come to the same conclusions as us, but that's not necessarily the point. It's
Yeah.
more just getting people to start thinking for themselves, because I didn't start questioning society as a whole until I really started down this route and really started questioning who I was. And then it was, well, who am I in the context of this society, and why is society wanting me to be a certain way? Like, what is the point of that? Like, who's pulling the strings behind the
Exactly.
curtain?
I love that. Who's pulling the strings? And it's a conversation I have often, whether people are speaking about like conflicts that we can see right now, or, you know, low quality of food, challenges with the healthcare system, all these things. And I'm always like, okay, who benefit from that? And then that will give you a good answer of why things are set up that way. And it's not about conspiracy theory. That's not where I'm going. It's just that one step at a time,
Mm-hmm.
the systems have been built. And now it's a bit difficult to unwind that. I think we are doing a good work at slowly but surely unwinding these systems, and especially this conditioning, to your point. But I think, again, starting by asking questions. Sometimes people always send you things, and I'm like, you know what? I'm not sure I have an answer for that. I don't think I have an opinion, but I certainly ask myself the questions. But I think it's healthy as well sometimes not to have an opinion.
Oh man, I just, yes. I, I think everybody tries to have an opinion, and like everybody thinks they need to have an opinion on every single subject that's going on. Like, I don't, I'm not even on Twitter or X anymore, but like I used to be. And everybody used to just comment on something, and even when you go on Instagram, everybody has some different comment or different opinion that they feel that they need to voice. And like most of the time we don't need to voice that. Like, it's not helping the collective, it's not helping the
Yeah.
the greater good. It's only helping our ego, of making us think that we're a little bit more important than we actually are. And I think it's something psychedelics have done, is they've humbled me quite a bit and made me
Hmm.
realize that, oh, I'm not the center of attention. Like, maybe all of these people don't give a shit, and that's okay. They don't
Yeah.
have to. We don't have to care about all of these things that I think we've been told that we need to have an opinion on and that we need to care about. And so I consciously find myself being like, oh, what do I think about this? And then realizing, wait, I'm not educated on this subject at all. My opinion is completely invalid.
Exactly. And I think that's a great point. It's not only, most of the topics we are not educated enough to have an intelligent opinion, but also the facts we're having today will be different in 5 years and in 10 years. So it's really just a point in time, like at some point people thought, the earth was flat, and then we realize it's not the case. And then some people came back with that nonetheless on internet. But you know what I mean? It's just that it's so interesting when I speak with healthcare professionals. Healthcare professionals usually, and I'm sorry to any healthcare professionals who's listening, because if they're listening, they're probably not in that category. But usually there is one truth, and it's their truth, and it's
Yeah.
the scientific truth. But before AIDS was discovered, people thought you were dying from pneumonia, but you were still dying from AIDS, even if it was not diagnosed. You're not changing the reality by saying it doesn't exist, So I just find very interesting to have, and I'm sure you do as well. I always receive a lot of questions when it comes to psilocybin, when it comes to microdosing, regarding scientific evidence and clinical studies, and then I'm like, okay, do you want me to show you scientific studies on climate change not happening? Do
Hmm.
you want me to show you clinical research showing that OxyContin is totally safe and not addictive? You have all the proof to tell you that anything I can show you can be fabricated and can be not true. So why do you still want this proof? I know it's a blanket, it's a security blanket, but it's a security blanket that is worth zero.
Hmm.
So, but we feel we want this reinsurance.
Yeah, we want to we want to feel like, what we think, and what we've been told. We want to feel that it's true, because like if it's not, we don't necessarily understand who we are at that point. Like it's these are the facts, and these are the things that have shaped us up into a point where, if this is no longer true, who am I as a person, and what do I actually believe? And it makes you have to start answering those deeper questions, which can get very uncomfortable.
Exactly. And it's also, I'm sure you face that very often. I have, again, many questions and doubters and maybe haters sometimes. I'm just like, it is not my job to convince you.
Hmm.
I'm here, I'm showing you what I've seen, what I have experienced, what I believe could help you. It's totally your choice to say yay or nay. And very often people expect you to fight and to, push and
Nope.
start argumenting. And when they see that I'm not throwing back the ball, they're very, surprised. But this is not my role. If you think it's not of interest to you, well, whatever I'm going to say is not going to change your mind anyway.
Yeah.
So
The
why?
energy that I could put into fighting you when you're not going to change your opinion and you're not going to change your mind, versus that same energy that I could put into helping the people that actually want to receive the help and do want to be guided. I can help a lot more people that way.
Exactly. So, and it's not a judgment value. There is no issue with people doubting things. I think it's very healthy to doubt things. I think it's less healthy to be antagonist for the beauty of being antagonist. And I always make that reference to Pepsi and Coke. If you didn't have Pepsi, would Coke be so prevalent? And the other way around, you exist because of your opposition. And I think that duality has brought us in a place that is not necessarily the best place, and we need to elevate above duality and more about transcendence. And this, you say black, I say white, and for an hour we scream at each other. I'm not sure it really brings any value to anyone, because you're living more convinced, I'm living more convinced, we're pissed off on top of that. And we brought a whole, a vortex of anger and maybe hatred as well. There is no value there. So the microdose diet is the opposite of that.
Hmm.
It's really, you know what? Read it, inform yourself. Here is a guide. Try it. What do you have to lose? Some of the tools you will like, some of the tools you will not like, some of the tools you will like today, but not like tomorrow. Some of the tools will be great for Cam, but not for someone else. And that's the thing, we're ever evolving. So the same book that you read today, in a year, in 10 years, is not the same book, because you're not the same reader.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, I
and
like that.
things have changed around you as well, so you absorb things differently.
Yeah. I'd like to talk a little bit more about your journey and how
Hmm.
you actually got to this point. So you used to work in finance,
Yeah.
and when did you first experience psilocybin yourself?
So it was a few years ago, and I would say the pandemic for me was really a catalyst,
Hmm.
because I had in the past, I've always been, I shouldn't say always, but for the last 15 years, I've been really trying a lot of different modalities, and the goal was really to go back to who I was my authentic self. Even if I didn't really know that it's what I was after, I realized that I was stuck in patterns that were not mine, in beliefs that were not mine, in energy that were not mine. It's easy for me now to explain. 15 years ago, I didn't know. I knew something was not working, but I
Hmm.
didn't know what, you know. So I started on that journey when I was in finance at the time, and I was very, very interested, and I was allocating a lot of my resources, time, energy, money as well into my personal development and my healing. And when COVID hit, I think it really became obvious that everything I've done had helped me very much, but I needed disruption. It needed something bigger, stronger than that, because I could see myself continuing for another 100 years and still not be able to get where I wanted to be. And at the same time, I also learned that growth is never ended. So I know I'll never be where I want to be, but I wanted to be at least closer to
Yeah,
that. And
in this lifetime at least.
exactly, exactly. And in Canada, magic mushroom is very available. Like so, we have shops. My actually massage therapist sells some. I have my own microdosing product as well now. So like it is not legal, but it is tolerated, whatever that means. So it was not difficult to find the products, but what was difficult, as I mentioned, was for me to go above and beyond the stigma
Hmm.
of psychedelics. So I spent quite a bit of time doing research. And you reach that point, maybe it was the same with you when you decided to go to ayahuasca, is that where you hope is higher than your fear, you
Yeah.
know?
What was your stigma of psychedelics at that point? Did you grow up thinking that psychedelics were a bad thing, or did you grow up really just not caring too much? Like, what was your relationship
Yeah.
with other substances as well, like alcohol and cannabis?
Yeah. So regarding psychedelics, because I was so misinformed, for me it was a Schedule One drug.
Hmm.
So I didn't know about all the healing power of psychedelics. I'm not gonna lie. I ate everything that I was given as a child, young adult, that drug is bad. Everything that is related to psychedelics are drugs, so you don't touch that. So
Hmm.
I've never partaken in anything. I've never really done anything. Cannabis, same thing. I have never really, used cannabis, whether recreationally, whether as microdosing. Alcohol, on the contrary, well, I'm coming from France, and but I would say I think it's true for every country now. Alcohol is widely socially acceptable, and that is where you see the dichotomy between what is legal, what is socially acceptable, and what is actually good for you.
Hmm.
And these are not the same thing at all. But before you start asking yourself this question, well, you're just following the party line. So I was drinking quite a bit. At the same time, I also did like very long spell without alcohol. But
Hmm.
overall, like I was drinking, and I was drinking not just a happy glass of wine with friends. There was a lot of times where the alcohol was self-medication.
Oh man,
Yeah.
my time in college, I mean,
Oh,
blacking out every single week.
yeah.
And I look back on it and realize that was self-medicating. Like it was, it was my subconscious trying to make me not deal with the shit that I needed to deal with, and it was a way for me to have to just be able to avoid all of that.
Yeah.
And that's
It's
that's
numbing.
yeah, exactly. It was numbing. I didn't have to realize that, and I mean, I think there was this part of me back then that, I mean, I definitely like hated myself a little bit. That was
Hmm.
just the way I grew up, the patterns I did. It
Yeah.
was, I'm not a good person, so I need to do all of these things and I'll have all these accomplishments to prove to myself that I am worth it and that
Yeah.
I am worthy of being loved. And so through that process of hating myself and self-medicating, give me the cocaine, give me all of the alcohol, in the world. And then that actually led me to finding psychedelics. And
Yeah.
then once I found psychedelics, I was like, wait a second, I feel like I'm actually getting better. Like I'm changing things about myself that I didn't like, and I'm thinking in different ways, and
Mhm.
that definitely spurred me to do more research into that. So like
Yeah.
in the numbing and in trying to not deal with the things, it led me to the thing that would then force me to deal with them.
Yes, exactly. And we all come from different paths. At the end of the day, what matters is you're getting there. For sure, we all wish it would have been easier and faster, but
I had a lot of
it's
fun. I'm not going to pretend like I didn't have fun.
oh yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Like the growing pain,
Yeah.
the growing pain, not the party filled with alcohol. I had more than a few where I had a lot of fun as well. Let's be honest, and I think that's very important for people to understand. It's always a question of balance. Whatever you're doing, balance and intention. Are you numbing yourself, or are you just enjoying the taste of something in a small and reasonable quantity because it's pleasant? And I don't think there is anything bad with having a glass of alcohol, having a cigarette, having, cannabis or whatever, as long as the intention is not to numb yourself to
Yeah.
oblivion and hide from the things you don't want to deal with.
Hmm. So you got led to psychedelics during the pandemic, and
Mhm.
you basically, like, before you took them, you started doing the research on them.
Yes, yes. I really, really wanted to understand what I was putting myself into. I didn't know anyone around me that was using psychedelics and microdosing. So I am a bit the canary in the coal mine for the people around me. I'm always one or two steps a bit more risk taking and innovative. So I did all the research and I was, wow, that's very compelling. And guess what? It's easy to get mushroom. Well, let's get started. So I started microdosing. I've seen tremendous results for me. For my mental health, which was the main reason I was microdosing, but also on my performance,
Hmm.
which was not reason number one, but I was very happy to take the benefits nonetheless. And the thing that was interesting is that at the time I was still in finance. I had my own advisory business. I was advising investment funds on where to allocate capital to startup companies. I was in the venture capital space. And I had a newsletter where I was writing actually versus speaking about technology companies and investments. And after a while, I was really, really so happy with my experience microdosing that I thought, oh, maybe I can use my newsletter and mention it. And I'm not going to say I didn't have trepidation before doing that and putting out to the world that guess what? I'm taking magic mushroom twice a week. And I got so many. I mean, the feedback I got was overwhelming, way more than when I was talking about investment in technology company. I can tell you that. I got so many questions. People were interested. Everyone wanted to understand the protocol. Da 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 da. Da. I was just like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't. You always think you're the only one suffering from anxiety and stress, and everyone is having a fun and happy life.
Hmm.
And then people were coming out the woodwork telling me their stories, whatever. I was just like, oh, I think that's the human condition. We're
Yeah.
definitely all in the same boat. And so I wrote that. That was interesting. I started writing more about companies in the psychedelic space, so still in the finance realm, but with a bit of a psychedelic twist. And then I decided to go on psychedelic psilocybin actually journey. So I went to British Columbia for a few days. I did a couple of journeys with psilocybin, and which
Were they guided journeys? Like, was it
yes, oh
with
yeah,
a okay?
yeah, yeah.
Was it one on one, or were you in a retreat?
Two shaman with me.
Oh,
I
nice.
wanted to do it on my own. I know there is a lot of power in doing it as a group. But for my first experience, I really wanted to do it on my own. And because I thought there was still so much things to work on, I'm like, okay, I need, I need
Hmm.
really the big, the big experience, And same thing, I came back and I wrote about that experience. People came back. And at the same time, my business in finance, it's not that I didn't like finance anymore. I love finance. It's fun. I mean, I find it very intellectually stimulating, but the energy were not matching anymore.
Yeah.
People didn't want to work with me anymore suddenly. I could not find anything. I was, and it kind of collapsed by itself. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to do something else. And at the time, oddly enough, because I started writing more about psychedelics, doing little videos, a literary agent reached out to me and said, well, why don't you write a book?
Mm.
And that's how it started. So it is very much one step at a time. Trust me, I had no idea 2, 3, 4 years ago. If you had told me, Peggy, you're going to stop finance and work in psychedelics, I would have told you, you should stop taking psychedelics because that is not going to happen. But this is how it happened, a step at a time,
Yeah.
and actually quite fast. It was quite fast. So I published the book last week. I published a masterclass as well last week. I started my own microdosing product in December. I'm doing public speaking, and that happened at the speed of light. So that's interesting as well.
Was there a lot of tension, and by tension I mean like internal struggle after you started writing about psychedelics, and then also seeing your finance business at the time just start not working, and like understanding that you were probably going to have to do something different?
Oh, it was terrible, because let's be honest, my identity and my, financial situation was linked with my career, my profession. And, I picked finance 20 years ago. And actually, I picked finance maybe 30 years ago. I've always wanted to be in finance, even when I was a kid, based on this conditioning, because
Hmm.
I wanted the money, I wanted the prestige, I wanted the power, like, which,
I find I just like it's so funny to me thinking that like a child being like, "Yep, I want to go into finance." Like no
yeah,
child unless they're born in this society will ever be like, "I want to go into finance." Like
exactly, while, I love animals, and it would have been more natural to think I would go in a job that is animal centric. But I come from, like sponsored housing, and, like money was very tight, to say the least. And the environment I grew up was very disempowering.
mhm.
So I thought, you know what? And you talk about lack of worth and self-hatred. And for me, having money, having power, having prestige was the only way where I could show my worth. I
Yeah,
could be respected.
because everybody in that society sees the money, and immediately you get more respect. Immediately they
Exactly.
start paying attention to you. They know nothing about you besides the fact that you have money, and that for some reason gives you validity and credibility. And even
Exactly.
something that you actually wrote about in one of your most recent newsletters is about, there are a lot of people in the world that have a lot of money and they're not so great people. Yet
Exactly.
people will still respect them and follow them and listen to everything they say, even though they might be kind of a piece of shit.
Exactly. And it's funny because even knowing that, most people would still pick having money.
Hmm.
Because to your point, that's all we live, I think, in societies that are very disempowering. And the only way we see as a society to have power is money, which is why especially in North America, I say a little bit less in Europe. I'm not going
Hmm.
to say it doesn't happen in Europe, but I mean, North America, that's really like the summum, maybe Dubai as well. But it's very disempowering when you really think about it, to think that your value is zero, my value is zero, unless I have a great bank account.
Hmm.
I mean, how awful it is to think about your self-worth as being negligible. So when you're asking me how difficult it was to transition, it was very, very difficult, because I, coming from Peggy, the venture capitalist, Peggy, the former exec in a large bank, Peggy who sits on boards, to Peggy who talk about psychedelics. Peggy was writing a little book, so and it is still interesting to see that, I have to catch myself not to fall into this list of accomplishment,
Hmm.
because it's very easy, again, the same justification that when we're justifying why psychedelics are great, it's very easy to fall into that justification of, well, yeah, but don't forget, I was in finance for 20 years, huh?
Yeah.
And
This is why, like, essentially, now that you're talking about psychedelics, having to remind people, oh, well, I was in finance, so this is why I can now do this, because I did all the things and now I've transitioned out. Whereas, yeah, that's no different than somebody who just started doing this to begin with.
the idea of having to justify the fact that, well, you are a smart and credible people keep saying that, oh, you're very credible because you are in finance for 20 years. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm taking it. That's great. Like, if
Sure.
I've done it, so I'm not going to spit in the soup and say I don't want it. But at the same time, like, that's very interesting to think I'm very credible
Uh-huh.
because I work in, so I can see, okay, maybe the anxiety, the stress, the depression coming from these very challenging jobs. But I mean, if you're a cashier at Walmart, trust me, your job is freaking challenging as well. You don't need to be an exec in a bank to
Yeah.
be stressed and depressed. So, but anyway, so it's interesting to see also the perception of myself in others' eyes.
Hmm. It's
And
it's interesting too, if you've ever talked to shamans or spiritual leaders that are, have been essentially grown up in this, like a lot of them in South America and some of the indigenous cultures here, like they don't give a fuck how much money you have or what you've done in your life. Like that's not even on their radar as far
exactly.
as who you are as a person. Like it
Yeah.
makes absolutely no difference to them anything that you have accomplished in your life.
Yeah.
And like it to the point where it's like a confusing question to them, like when you start talking about those things, like they truly just don't fathom how that has any context within the conversations
With
that they're
anything.
having. Yeah,
Yeah.
because to them it just doesn't, because
Yeah.
they've lived in such a different world. A lot of them
Yeah.
are, plugged into like the modern world too. I don't want to paint this picture of
Yeah.
shamans
Mhm.
of having, just essentially living in the jungle and not understanding how modern day society works. Like they
Yeah.
have iPhones and they have businesses too,
Yeah.
but it's, they understand that there are these different worlds
Yeah.
that we come from, and they understand that not one of them is necessarily correct or better than the other one. There just are differences between them.
Yeah. I think what's important is unhooking oneself
Hmm.
from whether your society is the jungle, whether your society is New York. The more you're unhooking yourself from, again, the belief of the society you grew up with, like but also the emotional wounds. I think right now I see so much generational trauma coming up to be healed, if hopefully we're going to get there. But you see the same with, whether you're talking about gender or all these things. And these are, I think, conversations that are coming up now to be healed. So it's, I am always interested to hear how people present themselves, the question they ask. So yesterday I was doing a presentation in front of 100 CEOs to talk about microdosing psilocybin. So that was very, very cool. And and so I explained about psychedelics, I explained about microdosing, and then because they're CEOs, I transitioned to, okay, what can it mean for you in your organization? Maybe you should look at your drug policy. Maybe so. I still made it business for them. There was not one question on that. All the questions were basically, "Oh, can I start microdosing?" And I thought it was very interesting to see that at the end of the day, people are people. They're thinking about their own
Hmm.
wealth first, health, sorry, well, health, wealth first, and and it's a lapsus definitely. But no, I thought people would be all over me to ask me, okay, what do I think is going to happen in terms of legalization? What do I think could be the risk for their companies, reputation risk? Absolutely not. Not one question about that. So I was like, okay, well, that's
Interesting.
here is my answer. People are way more open than what we think they are.
Yeah.
They just don't want to tell it.
What do you think that there are certain risks with psychedelics being painted as this thing to help wealthy CEOs with their business and make them just more efficient and productive with that? Like, do you think that could potentially have some adverse
Mhm.
effects in the long run?
Well, what I like is the same way I started using psychedelics for my mental health, I benefited from performance.
Mm-hmm.
People who are, you cannot really pick and choose. You get everything. People like this crowd who elect to use psychedelic as a personal and professional development tool, they will still also get the benefit in terms of connection with others, connection with themselves. A bit like what you were saying when you started yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It came even if it was not your intention. Same thing with the mental health. If you have a leader that is less anxious, less depressed, but also more connected to him, herself, of others, well, I don't think that can be a bad thing. So I don't. It's more of a pressure people can put on employees that I don't like,
Mm-hmm.
because employees, I can understand that you have other things in your life than just working.
Mm-hmm.
But I worked for very wealthy tech entrepreneur, and I know that, well, they look at you as the person who's generating revenue.
Yeah.
So basically, you're just a cog in the system, and if they can squeeze you a little bit more, well, times 100,000 person, well, that's a significant amount of wealth. So that's their intention in that context that I don't really like. Twisting the arms of employees to do something some people are not comfortable with, I think is not great. If they themselves alone decide that they want to use psychedelics and they are not imposing that on everyone, on anyone, wow. But I'm not sure. But again, my opinion might be different in 6 months or in a year. So
Of course. And that's totally fine too. We're allowed to change our mind once we get new information and once we see
exactly.
things unfold. Well, Peggy, I've really enjoyed this conversation with you. So thank you so much for coming on
Me
the
too.
podcast. Is there anything else that you would want to share as some parting words before we leave, and then also let people know where they can find you?
Well, people can find me. It's very easy. My book is called The Microdose Diet, and it's also the name of my website.
Cool.
And on
And
my
I'll
website,
be linking to these in the footnotes of the podcast as well.
yes, and on my website, people can find anything. Well, my parting thoughts will be actually more a comment or a question for you, because before we recorded, you were mentioning your talk in
Hmm.
Vegas a couple of uh, days ago, or maybe last week. I think that would be great if you would share that with the audience, because I thought it was very thought provoking.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that opportunity. So, what I was the name of my talk was psychedelics for more than just medicine, and by that I mean a lot of the discussions, especially when you go to these conferences, have to do with psychedelics specifically in a business context, or psychedelics specifically for healing like deep traumas and PTSD and depression, and using them in clinical settings and all of that. Whereas most of the people that I know that are in this space right now, that's not how any of them got started with them. Most of them got started experimenting with these substances by themselves, maybe with a couple friends, and we've had to figure it out and figure out what works best for us. And I think that there's a lot to be said for having to go through that process of figuring it out and not having it handed to us with this extremely well researched procedure of, oh, this is what works 100% of the time, because it just doesn't. That's not how I found psychedelics to work. And understanding that we're supposed to honestly go through some of that experimentation process to figure out what works best for us, because it
Mm-hmm.
is going to be different, and keeping an open mind, and then also making sure that we're staying safe while we're doing that. So understanding, practicing proper harm reduction principles of knowing your dose, starting low, going slow, maybe having a trip sitter with you, eating clean beforehand, like
Mm-hmm.
just little things like that. Like, if you go eat a Big Mac and then go take an eighth of shrooms, like it's not gonna be fun. Like I promise that. And I've done that before. Is the thing. Like I've eaten absolute shit food and then taken psychedelics, and it was a very different experience than, if I have a slow morning, I meditate beforehand, maybe I do fasted,
Mm-hmm.
or like I just eat a little bit of fruit, and
Yeah.
make sure that my body is in a good alkaline state. And so, I just want to encourage people, as we were talking about at the beginning, ask the questions and think for yourself. Like, just because even we are talking about, hey, this is how we do it, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's how you have to do it. But just encouraging people to ask the right questions, and also understanding that it's a relationship that you are building with these substances. The substance is not a thing; it is another living thing. um, and so they have a mind and they have an energy of their own, and understanding the supply chain of where you're getting it to. If you can grow your
Mm-hmm.
own medicine, that's amazing. If you can't grow your own medicine, which I understand a lot of people can't, understanding who is growing the medicine. Like if it's a sketchy back alley drug deal,
Yeah.
and he doesn't know what strain it is, he doesn't know anything about it, it's never been tested before, maybe
Maybe
don't
not.
do that. Yeah, maybe don't do that. You should be you're allowed to ask these questions, and it's hard because it's still not legal, and so
Yeah.
people think that we have a lot less power because something is not legal. Like, there's no consumer protections for buying mushrooms because it's not legal. So like they can do whatever they want, but you can also say no, and you don't have to buy and exchange that energy if it doesn't feel right.
Oh, I think that's a great parting thought, actually, Doesn't feel right? Just say no.
Exactly. And then say yes to the next guy.
Exactly. The one who feels good.
Uh-huh. Well, thank you again so much, Peggy. I really appreciate your time, and this has been a true pleasure. And I had a lot of fun, and I got to know you, so I feel good on my intention at the beginning.
Yes, thank you. And my intention was also to have fun and to be very present during this conversation. And I feel I can check that box, if I can say that. So thank you so much. It was a lovely, lovely conversation. And for you who was listening today, thank you for your time. And don't hesitate to contact Cam or I if you have any question.
Yep, and I look forward to coming on your podcast.
Yeah.
Bye, Peggy.
Bye, 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 Cam. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. And thank you again to Peggy for coming on the podcast. As I mentioned, all of the links to Peggy's info are going to be in the footnotes of this podcast. And if you feel so called to get in contact with me in any other way besides DMs, feel free to shoot me an email at tripsittingblog@gmail.com. Thank you again. I hope you are having a beautiful day. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And until next time.